Have you ever pulled a paper banknote out of your wallet, held it between your fingers, and genuinely asked yourself why this flimsy piece of printed paper is actually worth anything? You can't eat it. You can't melt it into tools. It has no use except what we agree it has. Now imagine walking into 18th century France, one of the wealthiest empires on earth, and convincing everyone, from the royal court down to street merchants, that this weightless paper is better than gold. Then imagine watching that same nation lose the modern equivalent of $2 trillion in a matter of months simply because they chose to believe in one man's mathematical promise. The architect behind this economic transformation was not a king, a decorated general, or a traditional statesman. He was a fugitive Scottish gambler, a convicted killer on the run from British gallows, and a mathematical genius who viewed the world not through morality, but through probability. His name was John Law, and in the early 1700s, he engineered a financial mania so massive and a collapse so devastating that it redefined the relationship between governments, citizens, and capital long before the term financial bubble was even coined. Today, we are going past the superficial history lessons. We are looking at the actual mechanics of how one man used human psychology to bankrupt an empire. We will analyze exactly how thousands of ordinary people became millionaires on paper overnight, only to watch their wealth evaporate when the system ran out of air. But here is the side of the ledger that most people ignore. John Law was not a scammer. He was not running a fraud. He was a brilliant economic theorist whose ideas about credit, central banking, and paper money are used by every major central bank on the planet right now. He was 2 centuries ahead of his time, but he made one fatal calculation, and that single blind spot cost France more wealth than the nation generated in a decade of hard labor. To understand how this machine was built, we have to go back to Paris in 1716. The golden age of France had hit a mathematical wall. King Louis XIV, the Sun King, had died, leaving behind a nation that was culturally magnificent but structurally insolvent. The treasury was empty. The state was suffocating under unpayable debt. France was on the brink of total collapse. And at that moment of crisis, a brilliant foreigner with a radical plan walked through the palace doors. But to understand why his plan worked, we first need to look at the mess he walked into. When Louis XIV died, the French government owed 3 billion livres. To put that into perspective, the annual tax revenue of the entire nation was less than 150 million livres. France wasn't just broke. They couldn't even pay the interest on the money they had already borrowed. The regent of France, Philippe d'Orléans, was running out of options. He had tried cutting spending. He had tried altering the weight of gold coins to cheat his creditors. He had even set up special courts to fine corrupt tax collectors. Nothing worked. The economy had ground to a halt because physical money, gold and silver coins, had vanished from circulation. Everyone was hoarding their metal, terrified of what the state would do next. This is exactly where John Law saw his opening. He understood something about money that the royal ministers could not grasp. The scarcity of gold was an artificial chokehold on human productivity. Law sat down with the regent and explained his big idea. He argued that gold and silver are not wealth. They are just vehicles to exchange wealth. True wealth is the output of human labor, agricultural grain, manufacturing, and trade. But to get those engines running, an economy needs a lightweight medium of exchange. If you only use the metal you dig out of the ground, you cap your own growth. Law's solution was to decouple value from physical objects and place it into a system of state-backed promises. He convinced the regent to let him start a private bank called the Banque Générale in May 1716. Here is how it worked. You walked into Law's office. You handed over your heavy gold coins. He gave you a crisp paper note. The note promised you could trade it back for the exact same amount of silver at any time. Because Law's bank was run with mathematical precision, and because the state accepted the paper notes for tax payments, the public skepticism dissolved. Suddenly, the French discovered that paper was better than metal. It didn't need to be weighed. It couldn't be clipped or debased. It moved fast. For 2 years, Law's banking experiment was a massive success. The frozen French economy thawed. Businesses reopened. Jobs returned. Taxes flowed back into the treasury. John Law went from a fugitive to the financial savior of Paris. But Law's ambition was not just to run a safe bank. His system needed a massive engine of growth to back the expanding paper money he was printing. He needed a giant enterprise that could generate real economic output. So in 1717, he looked across the Atlantic Ocean toward the wilderness of North America. He executed the second phase of his plan. He acquired a total monopoly over the French territory of Louisiana and created the Mississippi Company. The company owned everything from the Mississippi River to Canada. Exclusive rights. No competition. To the average person in Paris, Louisiana was a blank canvas, a distant land of infinite promise. Law needed something big for people to buy, something real. He merged the Mississippi Company with the Royal Mint, the tax collection system, and France's existing trading companies. He consolidated the entire commercial apparatus of the French Empire into a single mega corporation. Then came the masterstroke. Law announced that the company would issue shares to the public. But he did not just accept gold or paper cash. He allowed citizens to buy shares using old, depreciated government debt certificates. This was smart. People traded their worthless government bonds for company shares. Overnight, the government's unpayable debt vanished into a private corporation, and the public turned into a feeding frenzy. To fuel the momentum, Law launched a promotional campaign. He distributed pamphlets across Paris, describing mountains of silver in America, emerald mines waiting to be uncovered, and native tribes eager to trade fortunes for European goods. Most of it was exaggerated. Some of it was false. But the public, starved of opportunity for decades, devoured the narrative. They desperately wanted to believe. Then the psychology of mass speculation took over. Here is what happened. First, the street where shares were traded, the Rue Quincampoix, became the center of global finance. Thousands of investors crowded the alley daily. They camped in tents. They brought servants. Space was so tight that a local hunchback rented out his back. Brokers used him as a writing desk. He made a fortune. Second, the traditional class structure of Europe dissolved in weeks. Dukes, countesses, and royal ministers sold their family chateaux. They melted down silver heirlooms. They pawned jewelry, all to buy more Mississippi shares. One duke reportedly made 24 million livres in a single month. Third, for the first time in history, wealth was not tied to land. Shopkeepers and servants who entered early emerged as millionaires. They bought carriages and silk clothing. The crowds became so intense that multiple people died of suffocation in the press. Fourth, John Law himself reached the pinnacle of power. He was appointed Controller General of Finances, the Prime Minister of the French economy. He moved his offices into the royal palace. Nobility begged his assistance for stock tips. Fifth, at the peak of the mania, the total stock value of the Mississippi Company soared past 5 billion livres. That was higher than all the gold and silver in Europe combined. The entire French economy was now tied to a single stock price. But beneath the dazzling wealth was a fatal flaw. To keep the share price moving from 500 livres to 10,000 and past 15,000, investors needed fresh cash. To meet that demand, Law made his fatal error. He used his bank to print massive amounts of new paper money. He issued easy loans to speculators so they could buy more shares. It became a loop. Printed paper inflated the stock. The rising stock demanded more printed paper. Law had built a machine that was mathematically guaranteed to rip itself apart the moment the collective illusion flickered. Everyone was drunk on profits, but here is the cold reality. In a bubble, you do not want to be the last one holding the stock. When a stock price has nothing to do with the company's actual value, it is musical chairs, and the music always stops. By early 1720, a few big foreign bankers got nervous. They started selling quietly. They walked into Law's bank, laid down their paper shares, and demanded gold and silver coins. Once their wagons were loaded, they shipped the metal out of France and deposited it in safe vaults in Amsterdam and London. Law saw his gold disappearing. He panicked. He issued a series of drastic decrees. He declared that no citizen could hold more than 500 livres in gold or silver. Hoarding metal became a crime. He sent authorities to search private homes. He confiscated the metal they found. He mandated that all large transactions had to use paper currency. Then he took the final step. He banned private ownership of gold entirely. Everyone had to turn in their gold to the state. In return, they received more paper. That move broke everything. Trust vanished overnight. True value cannot be forced by decree when the public sees the state acting out of desperation. When ordinary citizens realized the government was hoarding gold while forcing them to accept paper, they saw through the illusion. The paper was not a liberating asset. It was a mechanism to protect the state at their expense. Within weeks, the panic became a stampede. The share price of the Mississippi Company plunged from 20,000 livres to 10,000, then to 5,000, then to 500. The same alleyways packed with buyers were now choked with sellers. But the buyers had vanished. The newly minted paper millionaires saw their fortunes evaporate in an afternoon. Noble families who had sold their land held nothing but inked paper that no merchant would accept. Servants who had ridden in carriages went back to manual labor. The paper livre collapsed so badly that people burned banknotes for heat. Firewood cost more than money. By December 1720, the entire system had disintegrated. John Law, the man heralded as the financial savior of France, fled Paris in the middle of the night wearing a crude disguise. He left behind a ruined credit system, an empty treasury, and a population so traumatized that France refused to adopt a centralized paper currency for another full century. But here is the most profound part. Law did not execute this system to enrich himself. He died years later in Venice, living in poverty and working as a low-stakes gambler. He never transferred a secret fortune abroad. He never stole from the treasury. He genuinely believed in his model. He was a brilliant financial engineer who mastered the architecture of asset creation. But he forgot the ultimate rule of economics. A system built entirely on trust cannot survive the millisecond that trust disappears. So what does an old French bubble teach us about today? Strip away the wigs and carriages. The pattern is the same. The modern financial world, with its stocks, crypto, and digital money, operates on the exact same bones that John Law built. The technology has changed. Human psychology has not. Here is the lesson. Trust and cash are limited. You cannot print your way out of a panic. The moment a system expands its credit supply faster than its productivity can justify, it is not creating new wealth. It is borrowing stability from the future. Consider the immediate aftermath of Law's collapse. The French government did not learn the right lesson. Instead of reforming their banking system, they banned all paper money for nearly a century. They returned to heavy gold and silver coins, which made trade slow and expensive. France fell behind Britain, which had adopted a more flexible credit system based on Law's own ideas. The British took the blueprint. The French burned it. John Law himself died in Venice on March 21, 1729. He was buried in the church of San Moise, but the exact location of his grave is unknown. For the last 9 years of his life, he supported himself by playing cards in Venetian casinos. He never returned to Scotland. He never saw his family again. At his death, his entire estate consisted of a few paintings and a small wardrobe. The man who had controlled the entire French economy died with almost nothing. But his idea did not die. 200 years later, every major economy adopted some version of Law's central banking model. The Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, all of them issue paper money backed by state authority, just as Law proposed. The difference is that modern central banks have independent oversight and strict lending rules. Law had none of those guardrails. He was a genius flying without instruments. Here is your homework. Look up the word liquidity, not the textbook definition, the real one. It is the ability to turn an asset into cash without losing value. The Mississippi Company had billions in paper value. It had zero liquidity. When everyone tried to exit at once, the exit collapsed, and the wealth vanished. Now look at your own assets, your savings account, your investments, your emergency cash. Ask yourself, if everyone wanted their money back tomorrow, would the system survive? The answer might make you uncomfortable. Same architecture, different century. If you want to understand how money actually works, not the headlines, but the real structural rules that run our global economy, hit subscribe. Let's keep reading the receipts that history tried to erase. Class dismissed. Go look at the financial assets you hold, or the currency in your pocket. The rules running those systems were written 300 years ago, and they are still running your life. I'll see you in the records.